I'd like to call to order this joint meeting of the Finance Committee, Select Board, and School Committee on Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. Our first item up is open forum. If anyone has anything. Nope, okay. Oh, and just a reminder that this is being recorded. Next up, Police Chief Chambers to go over FY26 budget for the police department.
Thank you. Some new faces tonight.
Good evening, everyone.
Deputy Chief Pelican, if anyone has not met him yet.
Good evening.
Right. So not a lot of changes within the police department budget. Overall, it's an actual reduction, including, or actually on top of what was reduced last year. The overall budget this year is expected to be 1.46 below what we paid out last year, with a reduction of 1.40 on our personnel side. Mostly on the personnel side, we have a lot of younger officers. We've had 16 positions turnover in the past 4 years, some of which were our command staff. So we have younger officers progressing through the steps, as well as some of our superior officers that will be moving up through the CBA steps as well. And then one of the other differences on the personnel side is a reduction of $8,000 in our court appearances. And that's mainly due to the way both the DA's office and juvenile offices are prosecuting crimes. They did take over some online and Zoom meetings that we also do, so the court appearances have dropped. We did try to do a 3-year average. I will caution, though, that it only takes one search warrant or one major case to really kind of balloon that. So we did reduce it by, I think, an appropriate amount. Expenses are expected to be reduced by 2.03%. Again, it's mainly driven by that change to the hybrid cruisers that we've made the commitment to over the past 4 years. The questions that were asked, I think it was Christina, you had actually asked about the difference in fuel gallons. So since we incorporated our first set of hybrid cruisers, we've dropped between 8,000 and 9,000 gallons. So between 2021 and 2024, we went from roughly 34,000 to just over 25,000 gallons used a year. So we are seeing a significant cost difference, cost savings, both in gallons used, and then on top of that, with the town committing to the central fueling station up the Westford Highway, the bulk rate, we have seen a decrease in the costs that are coming out of our budget. And then on top of that, our electricity usage has dropped. I'm not sure if the kilowatts dropped or if it was just the expected increase never materialized. So the savings that we realized on our electricity, whether it's through credits or wattage used, it's helped offset the increase in our natural gas costs. So we've seen a reduction on both sides of our budget. I would not anticipate that that's going to continue as the younger officers continue to move up the steps, as well as our superior officers through collective bargaining agreements. So with that's a basic summary of it.
Okay, great. Committee have any questions? Dennis, go ahead.
The chief and I, and along with the chair and select board member John Cunningham, we met on, I think it was the 10th of this month. Yeah, January 10th. We had a very good discussion with the chief. And today I gave out the activity sheets to everybody, and I just want to start off on a positive note. So
is a negative coming?
No, this is a very safe.
I want to start on a positive.
I don't want to start on this is a very safe community. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers for 3 years, and this is a very safe place to live. And it's due, I think, in 2 parts. I think it's due. I mean, obviously we have peaceful people here, but you can't also. You have to give kudos to the police department. There's 2 things that I think you do well. I think that deter it. I think your motor vehicle stops are high, which shows activity to people coming in and out of town, and I think you do your house checks on a regular basis, and I think those are the break and entering rate here is very low. So, I think the police are doing a very good job. Our job is to try to see if we can get that deterrence as efficiently as we possibly can, but the impact of the deterrence has been good. I mean, you look around us, we have some serious troubles all around, from Lowell, Billerica, Tewksbury, all around. There's issues But, you know, knock on wood and do their work, we're doing well. Now we're going to business, okay? So the first question I have here is, you did explain it to some extent, the $58,000 stipend for the accreditation. So the question I have is, can you explain the accreditation process a bit and tell us who does it and what does it actually look at and rate?
Yeah, sure. So, right now, we're contracted with the only game in town through the state is the Mass Municipal Police Accreditation Commission. We are an accredited department. We have been since 2005. We were one of the first 15 departments in the state to sign on. And I'd like to say that when we received our reaccreditation 2 years ago, we were within the first 5 in the state to be able to adhere to the new standards, and that was mainly due to the work of Deputy Jim Pelkman. As far as how many standards there are and everything, the deputy's been involved with accreditation for the past 10 years, so I'll defer to him on that question.
So, yeah, basically, the accreditation, that figure you're talking about is a stipend that all sworn officers receive from top to bottom through the collective bargaining agreement. It's 347 standards. If you print that actual document, it's 530 plus pages of checklists for compliance and documentation. Every officer basically contributes, participates, and in a leadership role because it covers all functions of the police department. So at a patrol level, it could be traffic, field training, supervisory, whether it's the holding cells, detaining detainees, all that, investigations, all the way up to budget and everything admin does. Really, every function is under that, and some of it's functional. Our DT instructors or use of force instructors could be sergeants and leaders in that, where patrolmen or field training officers and other roles. So it really covers all functions of the department.
And what those policies do for us is to make sure that we're maintaining best standards and best practice, really. It benchmarks us across the rest of the country. It's very similar to the CALIA accreditation, the national accreditation. There are a few more standards under CALIA, but for our department to be one of the first to complete the 6th edition under assessment was it was a lot of work. So, but what that accreditation gives us is accountability, transparency, and assurance that we're following best practices amongst different communities. So, in every single person in the department, and it's not just officers that have to follow accreditation, it's our dispatchers, our public safety communicators, and it's actually our civilian personnel as well, because they fall under a lot of the same standards under our rules and regulations. Conduct on becoming an officer is not just for an officer. Neglect of duty is not just for an officer. So by having those best practice standards set forth by an outside agency that is reviewed, we do weekly policy reviews that go towards our accreditation standards. Back in 2020, when we sat with the community committee that the First Parish Church was able to set up, we leaned on our accreditation standards. We were able to provide best practice policies for use of force, for racial profiling. We do, through accreditation, we're required to run all of our citation numbers to make sure that we don't have any discrepancies or disparities. So that's what we get through accreditation. And that additional demand on officers and our civilians, they bargained in a stipend for it.
Okay, so now, as you're aware, since the creation of the Massachusetts Police Officer Standards and Training Commission, they will be promulgating standards across the state worldwide that everybody's going to have to reach. How will you see that affecting this this stipend, as far as you have brought it to a level higher than everybody else, but now the state is going to require everybody to come to a certain standard as a matter of standard operating procedure. So how does that affect the accreditation, the stipend, you think?
I don't think it's going to affect it at all. I think impact is gold standard. What Post is, from my understanding as the chief of police, what Post is proposing is there's a set of minimum standards that they expect each department to reach, mostly around bias-based policing, use of force, overtime scandal type stuff. Like, those are the big ones, right? So it's officer accountability type type standards that they're going to be bringing forward that will standardize across the state. Ours isn't just for those 6 or 8 standards that Post has been tasked with creating. It goes far, far beyond that. It covers every aspect within the police department, from civilian all the way through the chief.
And MPAC adopted the police reform standards, so there was an additional 25 standards that got created in the latest version once the police reform law came into law. So it's actually additional documentation and compliance.
Now, the other thing you made mention of it was the reduction in the court time. I think it's important to get an idea from the conversation that we had, what precipitated that reduction, and particularly with the results of the district attorney's involvement and all that. Can you explain that a little bit more for the?
So I think, with the police reform in 2015, 2018, and then the new police reform that came out, and I think it was finalized at the end of 2020, 2021 when Post was formed. A lot of the lower level crimes that used to be prosecuted, take operating after suspension, first or second offense, officers were called to court even if it was being, if it was going to be continued without a finding, or they pay court costs and registry costs, and then the officer would get paid 4 hours just to show up to have a DA plea it out. What we're seeing now is a lot of those types of cases are being handled pre-trial, which is, I think, the way it should be. So we're seeing a dramatic reduction in the kind of lower level things that we are forced to enforce in certain aspects, but I think we're seeing a better result. But on top of that, with the juvenile law, particularly from 2018, when some of the SRO laws were changed, there was the MOUs and standard operating procedures that came out of the DA's office, really affected how juvenile crimes were looked at, prosecuted, and dealt with throughout the juvenile justice system. So that's where I would attribute it to. So we've seen the time that our officers are involved with court cases drop.
The concern I had was that you mentioned shoplifting, right? And has the shoplifting just involved juveniles, or does it involve everybody across the board, the reduction in the prosecutions with regard to shoplifting? What
we see here in town is usually not juvenile shoplifting. It's usually career criminals that do it professionally, or they steal certain things and trade it at different places in Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill for either drugs or, in some cases, just money. So over the past several years, the DA has chose not to prosecute those types of crimes, but what we've seen is repeat offenders that are being arrested by multiple agencies throughout multiple areas, and because those charges generally get dropped before they even go to trial. We have had multiple discussions as the Middlesex Chiefs and NEMLAC Chiefs with the DA, Marion Ryan, about those repeat offenders, and we've been asking her to take a look at how those types of cases are prosecuted, particularly when you have an individual that has been arrested 5, 6, 7 times for, we're not talking candy bars, we're talking thousands of dollars worth of merchandise from Home Goods, from Marshall's here in Westford, or the Verizon store, or basically any place that carries highly desirable goods. So that's one thing that I think will be changing over the next year or two. I think that you're seeing those repeat offenders, particularly, I talked with Chief Columbus over in Tewksbury about it, and he's one of the ones that's actually spearheading it, because they arrested the same offender 4 times in a month. The time frame may be a little bit more than a month, but it was kind of the driving force for us to, as chiefs, to come together and bring it towards the DA. That something needs to change, because that type of retail theft, it's not food. Generally, occasionally we'll get somebody pushing a full shopping cart out of Market Basket full of lobsters and steaks or something like that, but that's very rare. What we're getting called for here in the community is generally Home Goods and Marshall's down at Cornerstone Square. Shopping carts full of clothing and Home Goods, kitchen utensils.
Yeah.
So
the reason I brought it, I thought it was critical, was we already known about the situation involving the shrinkage of our commercial retail establishments, And I thought this was relevant to the fact that, you know, if our retailers are having that kind of problem in their establishments, it's just another obstacle in drawing more commercial people to our town, to help us take off the burden. So I'm glad you brought that out, right? I too
Can I
just,
stop on that
yeah.
for 1 second, Dennis? So how do we compare to other communities
Yeah.
in that respect?
I don't have the data,
Okay.
Christina,
Oh, good.
but I would say, yeah, I would say we're
I
good.
was kind of
I
anticipating.
mean, I think, from what you said, it's going on in all of the surrounding
Everywhere,
communities.
and probably worse in
Worse.
other
Yeah.
places, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Places with more retail obviously have more shoplifting problems. We don't have a lot of walk-in retail stores like that. We have several calls a month down to Marshall's Home Goods, and that's what's reported. I know
Right,
that
they may not even
they
call.
choose not to report, you know, if somebody you know, it's been our experience that they don't report every crime that occurs down there, so
Yeah.
it's generally when they have higher value items.
Okay, go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, just two more questions. The first one was, under your, we discussed the detectives, and you indicated there were 8, and I understand counting in that 8 are 2 SROs and there's 2 supervisors. So is it fair to say there's like 4 actually working detectives that are out there, that are out there working, doing the job, right?
Yeah, well, currently, we have one spot that we're working, or will be working to fill, when our academy graduates come out. We'll be able to get some another senior officer back in there. I think we have some, not unaddressed needs, but we'd like to be able to spread some of the work out and maybe get a little more special attention in some areas that I'm not gonna discuss in an open forum like this.
No,
But,
understood.
yeah, but our detective bureau is manned 16 hours a day, so we like to have a supervisor on between both shifts.
Yeah, that was the question I was gonna ask you, why the 2 supervisors in the unit?
Yeah. The two different shifts, as well as the type of specialty crimes that the detectives are dealing with, we're finding are much more complex. The amount of documentation that's needed, the amount of oversight that's needed, working with the DAs, it has changed dramatically. I was in detectives for 5 years back in the early 2000s, and if you have a good contact, you used to be able to just make a phone call and tell them I need a phone record, I need a subpoena, I need, you know, this email frozen, and you would be able to get all the data without subpoenas or search warrants. The amount of work that goes into a case, even just I don't want to call it a simple fraud case, but, you know, a general fraud case of a couple $1,000s that happens over the internet, that's double-digit numbers in hours just to be able to get a search warrant or the IP returns. And that's several times going back and forth with the DA. You have to type it all and then submit to the DA, and then they usually obliterate the thing and send it back. But the amount of work that goes into it, and then just the specialty laws that have been designed over the past 10, 15 years around cyber crimes, juvenile law, you name it, it's probably been looked at and changed. So the types of reporting and how we do it has changed dramatically over the past 20 years. So you really need supervisors and officers or detectives in there that have received the additional training, have the time to be able to perform their duties thoroughly, and that requires overview of those supervisors as well.
By the way, just as a comment, we discussed the reporting of the activity in the town reports, and I just want to say I did 21, 22, 23. 21, you included a lot of enforcement and agency response information, which I would recommend that you re-include in previous years, because I think it's very useful to be able to evaluate what goes on. The last question, and you know, we've had this conversation about the second captain, and I did take your advice, and I did check in with Tewksbury and at least examine Tewksbury and Bill Recca. And you're correct on Bill Recca. They do have 2 lieutenant commanders, which I'll grant you are the equivalent of captains, which the only difference was that Bill Recca is a much larger population, 41,000 people. The police department's a bit bigger as well. And then the last thing is that they have an overdose issue, about 31 a year. And I was able to find that information too. We're at 6. So just a couple towns over, 31 overdoses a year is a lot. And I did look at Tewksbury as well. I was not able to confirm whether or not they actually had 2 captains. However, they've moved significant amount of their patrol officers, not significant amount, but a large amount, into detectives. They have a overdose issue of 25 cases a year, which is really a lot. So we're keeping it down, but it's very important to keep an eye on that. And I just still not quite convinced about the second captain, but I'll grant you that.
I'm well aware of your opinion, Dennis, thank you. But I would like to point out for the new members of the Finance Committee, the rank structure and staffing within the police department has not, particularly the rank structure, has not changed since 2008. When we added a few officers in, I want to say just after 2010, I think we added a couple, and then we had the task force or the review committee that we had back in 2016-17 with the anticipated growth. We did add a few more officers, and with that we did add the detective sergeant position within the criminal bureau. So that is the only change to our rank structure that has occurred since 2008, when the second captain's position and deputy chief's position were originally, well, the deputy I think was in first. But so we have not had any change since 2008, and if anything, policing has gotten much more complex over the past 15, 18 years, where we need that level of oversight, that level of transparency, accountability, and professionalism. As these standards continue to come out with the, Peace Officer Standards and Training Committee, it's a lot to keep up with, and you have to have a superior officer on top of that, because they're the ones that are touching base with every officer of rank below them to certify those and bring them to the chief to sign off on. We have limited, I won't get into all their job descriptions, sorry. But there's a reason why we are structured the way we are. It's been successful for the past 17 years now. It's been shown to work. Whether it lines up with every other department in our area, I know it doesn't. It lines up with some. It works here, and we've been one of the leading agencies in our area since I've been on board in 2000. So I think you get a lot of bang for your buck for what our police department delivers to this community.
Thanks very much. All set.
Thanks. And just to add on to that, Dennis, I know you have a background, so I like to listen to both of you guys just to hear. But as we had talked about, we may be seeing a lot more people moving to Westford if MBTA comes in. So, I don't think we want to be reducing anything more at this time, just to see what's coming ahead.
I would hope not, particularly with the Bell Westford apartments and the other apartments that went in there. I know that there's another subdivision of 500 plus apartments that are going to be going into that same exact area. We are really going to have to take a look at our staffing along the Route 110 area. Currently, again, I won't get into an open session, but we are going to have to look at our patrol areas and possibly even address our minimum manning staffing.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we can continue to do it with our currently approved minimum manning.
Yeah, but it's good to keep an eye on, because that staffing study was done 2015?
16, 17, I think we started.
And we never got to the number, we lost ground with the fill override, so we're down from that number.
We got them in the budget, we just couldn't get
Yeah.
there. It takes about a year, just for anybody new to the board, it takes about a year for us to get anybody on board. If they're not academy trained or transfer laterally from another civil service department, by the time the interviews, the backgrounds, and everything else are done, it's usually about 2.5 to 3 months. Then they have to pass physicals, everything else, and then the police academy itself is between 5 and 6 months. And then they have a 3-month period where they're on field training. So they're riding with experienced veteran officers, learning how Westford does things, learning the town and everything else. So that takes about a year to backfill any position.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Nate?
Yeah, thanks. I have a few questions. I'm Nate McKinnon.
Hi, Nate.
One of the new members.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you all, Chief. Just first of all, Quinn Bill, the Police Career Incentive Pay Program, that is the only spot in the budget where educational incentives come into play? Is that accurate? I'm just wondering if they're elsewhere or if it's all on that line.
No, that's mine.
That's yours specifically?
Yes. Everybody else is rolled into their base pay.
Into their base pay?
Yep.
Okay, why is yours, out of curiosity, itemized separately?
I don't receive hourly pay, so it doesn't kick on to anything else. And mine is paid out a little bit differently. I get 2 lump sums throughout the year. All the other officers, their Quinn bill or educational incentive is built onto their hourly pay, so that does affect their holiday pay, their overtime rate, and some town detail rates.
Okay, I see. So if I'm a officer with a master's degree, for example, you know, next to an officer who's got the same, started the same time as me, who only has a bachelor's degree, it's built into my base compensation, my educational incentive. So therefore, when I'm doing overtime, it's billed that way as opposed to that person.
It'd be about 5% more.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
associate's degree officers receive a 10% bump in their base pay, 20% for their bachelor's, and 25% for a master's. So I will say we have a very highly educated police department, and if they don't have a degree, most of them are, those that don't have degrees are military or currently working towards their degree.
Great. Community college is free now in Massachusetts.
Yes, it is, and we're encouraging those that do not have even an associate's degree to pursue it.
I love that. Thank you. The second question. So then, the other members of the leadership, they're also not in that Quinn bill. It's built into their base pay as well.
Correct.
Okay. And then my other question is on the overtime line. So it looks like the FY25 budget is just a slight increase over FY24. Does it seem like you're going to come in around that in this current fiscal year, or are you trending to?
So we're trending under this year.
Okay.
So obviously, it's all subject to change if we have injuries or officers that leave. That does dramatically impact our overtime. There was a slight increase between 24 and 25. We did ask for a level funding for 26. I know in your budget books, there might be a slight increase for fiscal 27. That was hopefully to account for any settled CBA, if there's a COLA involved in that. So right now, we're trending, I think we're at about 46, maybe a little bit less than that on our overtime. So more than halfway through the year, we should have some money left in our overtime budget.
That's great news. Do you at any point on a regular basis do any type of analysis on that account and the utilization, and whether or not it would be fiscally sound to consider adding an additional FTE to try and reduce that? You know, if there's regular sort of enough utilization of overtime?
Yeah, I understand that. We haven't approached it that way only because this, as Dennis can probably attest, this job is pretty fickle. Our officers can leave at any different time, and all it takes is one injury or one person leaving, and all of a sudden we start to hemorrhage overtime because we're addressing our minimum staffing needs. So it's hard to reduce the overtime budget to then put it back into a full-time position. If you compare us to other communities of our size and staffing levels, our overtime budget's actually quite low. I know we discussed that last year during the efficiencies committee. So I think again we try to address things very fiscally responsibly. We do allow our officers to generate some comp time, so officers will take an overtime shift and not take overtime and use comp time, compensatory time, and we don't allow compensatory time to then create overtime on their shifts. So I think last year we had just under 7,000 hours of compensatory time that officers decided to take instead of overtime. So at any time that can change.
Great.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Shelby.
So you mentioned that part of the reason for the reduction is due to some collective bargaining agreements expiring. I'm just curious kind of like what the timeline is for the new agreements to come and how that's put into the kind of budget for future years.
So I can answer kind of at the base level. You may have to ask Kristen or Dan on the more intense stuff. But so the contracts this year will expire June 30th, and they'll be looking to negotiate a contract hopefully for 3 years from starting July 1st. I know that they do comp reserve for that's set aside each year to account for all the different unions that will be up. I think they have most of the unions on the same schedule this year, so you might see a higher number in the comp reserve than what is normally shown, just because there are several different unions whose contracts expire at the end of June.
Actually, all the unions
All
are
the
expired
unions?
at the end of June, so
Okay,
there's
all
not,
the unions, yeah.
there's
So-
not a specific schedule for when those get settled. It's, you know, when we come to an agreement at some point in time. But right now, we're only active with the fires at this point, so we haven't started with the 5 other unions yet,
Which has already expired.
which has already expired. The fire one has, yes.
And we do encourage our union presidents and their negotiating team to touch base with Dan. It was actually very successful this past round of negotiations for the Superior Officers Union. They were able to sit and talk with Dan and come to an agreement that I think everybody was satisfied with.
Just a quick comment.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Just, this is more for the information of the Select Board and the Finance Committee. You know, the review of the activity is important, and they can be used as standards to determine performance. So, for example, one of the things that we have very low in this town is B&Es, all right? So the breaking and entering is low. A lot of that, I think, is attributable to the active house checks that go on a regular basis. Another indicator is motor vehicle accidents, how many motor vehicle accidents. This gives you an idea of how the enforcement is being done, if it's effective. And then the last one that I always point to with regards to the drug trade is the overdose level. And we, you know, thank goodness we still have a fairly low one. It's, you know, it hovers around 5 or 6 compared to when we were checking Bill Ricker and Tewksbury. It was really significant. So when you're looking at performance and you're also looking at staffing, these are indicators to look at. I know there's this big idea about looking at calls, but that's not considered a, it's an indicator, but it's not a vital indicator as these other ones would be. So I just wanted to throw that out for your own review and your own consideration.
I would just like to point out, though, that we do still have a significant amount of drug calls that may not always be classified as drug calls. We do experience quite a number of medical calls for overdoses that may not be classified as overdoses because the individual either does not receive Narcan or does not turn into a fatality. We recently had a drug call where we found fentanyl in a firearm. So I don't want to bury our heads in the sand and think that it does not happen here. It does. So it's not a major problem, but it's also not, it's still existent.
You have to watch it, and by the way, we had the conversation with Ray Dick. We should be monitoring that type of contact where we're having incidents with drug overdoses and drug-related issues. Those need to be monitored by somebody so we can get an idea of how that flow's going, so.
We will include that in our next year's set of information. We're working with the Community Outreach Initiative Network, that our program with our part-time clinician. She is riding along. She was here until 7 p.m. tonight. We do referrals to them all the time for either drug use, mental health issues, homelessness, and other, pretty much anything else that we can think of to refer to them. The amount of resources that they have at their disposal through the advocates is immense.
I found the website, Department of Public Health. It is updated. It's much better than it used to be, so that's good.
Much.
So thanks for the lead.
Anyone else have any questions, anything online? I just had one follow-up, and this may be more for Dan. When the budget was first presented, the gap between the FY26 budget that was presented versus the one that we had projected from last year, one of the lines was about $190,000 difference in the police budget, and I just wanted to get a breakdown of that. I remember you going over it at one point, but I couldn't find what the differences were. Like, I think some of it was forecasting with some of the newer officers, people had retired, but then there were a couple other things in there that caused that difference in.
Sure.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, they touched
Okay.
on most of them, so this was from
Okay.
a specific budget at a certain point in time where we
I'm not aware of
compared
that
it.
one.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of turnover. We do have a lot of new officers come in, so that was a bulk of it.
Okay.
We also had 4 cruisers in the projection for FY25, so that was,
Okay.
was it like 48,000 or so per?
Probably like 72, 68 to 72, somewhere in there. Or 72.
I just need the budget.
73.5.
73.5, so there's a big piece of that as well. They mentioned the court appearances, which is about $8,000. The gasoline is down, and the electricity is down as well. So all those combined really decreased was the result of the decrease from that projection
Okay,
back
and that was,
April.
okay, like roughly 73K for the cruiser?
Sure.
In that
Yeah,
ballpark?
I can get you a detail if you
Yeah,
want
that would
it.
be great.
Yeah,
Okay,
sure. Let me
thanks.
write that down.
Okay. Go ahead, John.
Chief, on your special details, I know you have a revolving fund that covers details,
Yes, sir.
but in your budget, you have special details for about 32,000. Which specific details is this for?
So that covers town meeting, polls, apple blossom, basically town, like established town events or government-related details. So a lot of times if we have protests up on the common, like a couple of years ago, we had to additionally draw out of that. But it essentially covers elections, polls, town meeting, special town meeting, apple blossom, Memorial Day, maybe one or two others.
Do you have any idea on the order of magnitude of the revolving fund as you go through a year? How much goes through that fund in 1 year?
I'll have to defer to Dan because I don't even see that.
We don't see it in the budget or anything like that, and
Neither do I.
it is a revolving fund, and
I would imagine that it was well over $1 million last year.
Ooh, that's moment of truth. I'm in FY '25 right now, so just to get a ballpark.
yeah.
We've brought in 556,000 so far, just in details, about halfway through the year. So you're right, about $1 million.
Yeah.
So
That's
And there is a
about-
10% fee that the town receives as well on top of what's getting paid out to the officers.
We get a 10% fee. Where's that?
it goes to local revenue.
Oh, okay.
So that's my presentation next
About
week.
the only
Oh,
money
yeah.
that is
Wait for it.
Yeah, that's a lot of hours.
it's a lot of hours.
How does that impact your scheduling?
That's probably why officers generate so much comp time too, to be honest. You know, they'll take a night off if they work the detail. They're not allowed, so an officer is not allowed to work detail if they're scheduled. You know, so if a detail comes in from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and they're working the 7 to 3 shift, they can't touch it unless they take some of their paid time off or their comp time to even be eligible to take it. And if it's an 8 to 4 detail and somebody's working 3 to 11, they need to actually have somebody either stay over for them, or if we're not at our minimum standards, our minimum manning, they can take an hour of compensatory time to cover. They have to cover their time off to cover a detail. There's absolutely no chance to double dip.
Do you run up against that minimum manning issue often?
Right now, I wouldn't say we're hitting it unless everybody's on vacation, so certain times of the year, we certainly are running at minimum manning. When we're short-staffed, we're at minimum manning quite often, and you'll see the overtime drivers. The overtime will just skyrocket. But we try to manage as much as possible. We have our officers submit their vacation time in April for the upcoming year. So some of our officers, if they have 28 days, they have to submit 21 of those days, almost, sometimes over a year in advance. So we do try to mitigate it as much as possible.
Okay. Thanks.
Can I ask a follow-up? Forgive my ignorance, but
No problem.
Can you give me a scenario, just to know, the week of an officer, what would cause them to generate compensatory time?
So if they take an overtime shift, and they could take it instead of being compensated at time and a half, they get compensatory time of 12 hours. So if they work an 8-hour shift, they get a chance to take 12 hours off. But once they generate that comp time cannot turn around and generate overtime.
I see.
Right, so they can only take that time off if we've exceeded our minimum manning. So if we have 5 cruisers scheduled and they want to take a shift off, they can use 8 hours of their compensatory time to take a shift off.
So, and forgive me, Dan, if you don't know the answer to this, it's okay, but last week we talked to the fire department and talked about their overtime. Do they have the same compensatory time as part of their options for their members, or is it just overtime?
It's just overtime for them,
Okay.
they have comp time.
Okay, so, I looked at your overtime amount, but if I really want to understand how much it costs taxpayers, I need to also look at your total compensatory time in a cash value, correct? Like, this is just half the picture, because if I take compensatory time, although I'm not getting cash, I can take a shift off. If I take a shift off, you have to cover that with somebody else.
No,
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 Only if it
Okay.
dips.
Nope.
yeah.
only if it dips.
Only if it dips to below minimum.
which we wouldn't allow them to take compensatory.
It's supposed to be on
They can't
minimum
take-
manning, then they have to.
They
Hey, do you
can't take
understand
comp
what
time.
minimum manning means?
No, I don't.
I think that's the
Alright, so
the
our,
difference here.
we have a minimum staffing level, which I can talk to you about privately, I'm not gonna
Sure.
put that over the air.
That sounds fine.
So, say, I'll throw it out there, but say we have 5 officers scheduled and we have 2 supervisors. And our minimum manning says that we can go down to 4. So somebody can take comp time and we'll have 4 cars on the road instead of 5. But if somebody calls in to try to take additional comp time, they're not allowed to because we're at our minimum manning.
I see, okay.
However, it doesn't prevent them from taking a personal day or sick day. So,
Understood.
if we have somebody out on compensatory time and we're at our minimum manning and somebody else from that shift calls out sick, they have the flu, that does bring us below minimum manning. Now, we do have to backfill that one spot to bring us back to our minimum staffing requirement. So, it's not the comp time that's creating the overtime, it's the sick time.
And do you track from a fiscal perspective the value of the comp time?
Yeah, that would be relatively simple, yeah. It's the amount of hours that they generate versus what their hourly pay is what we would pay out.
Do you have a sense of what that current balance is?
We closed last year just under 7,000 hours worth of comp time. I would have to run exactly which
Okay.
officers took what time and what their rate was.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
It could be done, it's,
I may follow up with you for just a one-on-one lesson on minimum manning.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
I got that lesson about 3 years ago. It's worth the instruction time.
Thank you.
I will say police scheduling and fire scheduling are 2 completely different animals. They work a 24-hour shift, 2 days off, 24 hours, and then they're off 72 or
96.
yeah. So our officers work, most of our patrol officers work 4 days on, 2 days off. So they're still working 5 days a week in most cases. Occasionally it works out in their favor, but so it's very difficult to kind of compare apples to apples with police and fire.
Understood, thanks.
Anyone else? I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up,
It's nice and warm.
It's got the seat warm.
next up, Westford Public Schools. Welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
For the new members, if you haven't met our Director of School Finance, this is Jenny Lynn, and she's done a phenomenal job over the last few years as we've had very challenging situations, so I'm very grateful to all the work that she's done. Should I just jump in, or?
Sure.
I was just thinking about if we could just use the, slide 11 and slide 12, then I could just share an overview.
Just an overview, yeah. I think
Yeah,
that'd be
just
good
to,
then.
for context, and then we can kind of just dive into questions.
Sure.
So this year, we met, I think, slide 11 would be a good place to start. So, when we started developing the FY26 budget, and Jenny did a phenomenal job rolling things over to look and see what our needs were, we had determined that in order to keep everything level service, our needs would be approximately $70,510,949. And we met with Kristen and Dan earlier in the fall and talked about where the town was at, and they had said that they would be able to provide an allocation of $69,388,572, which put us in a situation where I needed to look to see where we could reduce $1,122,377. So that's kind of the way we went into this. If you just go to the next slide, you'll see this is what I presented. These are just 2 slides from the presentation that I shared with the school committee. So I led with our budget strategy was to identify reductions, efficiencies, and increase the offsets in order to eliminate this $1.1 million deficit in order to bring a balanced Westford Public Schools budget to annual town meetings. So we identified reductions, efficiencies, and there were a couple of additions that we have included in our budget, which came to a total of a reduction of $316,198. And then we identified overall increased offsets of $806,179. That the increased offsets, $400,000 of that was we had a surprising increase to our circuit breaker that was very beneficial to us for this year. And then we had identified $406,179 worth of increased offsets to the revolving funds that we have. Based on the conversations that we had last year, we had already been talking about this as a school department with the school committee in terms of developing more specific guidelines to the different revolving accounts that we have access to. And then during the process that we had with the FinCom last year, we talked about that specifically. And so one of the things that we're very proud of this year, although the budget itself is still looking at some reductions, and I'm still not convinced that it's a strong foundational budget moving forward over time. One of the things that we did working with the school committee is that we developed our non-general fund guidebook, and it established very specific guidelines for the appropriate end-of-year balances for the different funds that we had. And Jenny did a phenomenal job looking at what those target balances would be and able to say, okay, over the next 3 years, we thought that we could increase the offsets that we typically have, which this year brought us to $406,000, that we would be able to do that for a couple of years in order to support our general fund. Now, the concern is that when we get to FY28 and FY29, somewhere in between there, all of those offsets will then hit the targets that we've identified would be the appropriate balances to keep in those funds. So that means that we will need to identify different ways to support that at some point, whatever that funding source is, whether there's new growth, whether we need to consider an override in the future or anything like that. The idea being is that we'll have to identify something in FY28, FY29. But what we're looking at right now and what we've presented to the school committee and what we share with you tonight is with using those funds, we think that we'll be able to support that for the next few years. And so that's sort of the context in the big picture. I'm happy to talk about the different efficiencies and additions. If you have questions about that, we've provided you with answers to the questions that you asked us in advance. And we also, I don't think we've done in the past, this year we decided to actually share with you all of the questions that the school committee had asked us as well too, which I thought that would be helpful because often you ask the same questions.
Yeah.
And so to see that, I thought would be helpful.
Okay, thanks. Questions? Dennis?
Yeah, Nate McKinnon and myself met with both Dr. Chu and Jenny last Friday. We had a very interesting conversation, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the work that was done on that guidebook. I thought that was a significant amount of work, and I mean the essence or the concern that was expressed during our last finance committee was that we had money that we wanted to try to cover gaps with, and there was some money there, and we needed to see if there was a way that it could be accessed, and they did a significant job in trying to find that out. And I think the word I get thrown off of the word offset. It's more like a chargeback program, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I understand it. So I got it down. Like you were talking about the school choice offset was $890,000, $789,000. Food service was 153.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're charging those services money back that comes back into the school general fund. Is that what happens? Good. I mean, you basically fulfilled the intent of what we were concerned about last year. So that was an outstanding job. I mean, that was well done. And
We do listen to you.
no, it's shocking, but it's true. Well, we're the first ones that are flabbergasted, so that's good. The only thing I would just refer to is that we also discussed about the contract negotiations.
Yep.
And I did have an opportunity to look at the numbers, and I saw how they went. And I would just simply say that, we also talked about market basket, which is also interesting, and I've always suggested, and others have suggested, that you've got to consider that per capita income per community. Because what happens is if you override that, which is what I think happened in that last, it wasn't just, in my opinion, it wasn't just the reserve funds that stalled. I think a lot of it was the amount of contract. It was a 9.8% for four groups. I think it was just a little bit too much for everybody to handle. So I think you just want to bear that in mind, all right? Because eventually you have to go and sell this to the public,
Yeah.
right? So that's something that you may want to just take.
I
But
think
other than that,
to that point, Dennis, so let me interrupt, because I think, and based on the conversation we had the other day too, I do think that one of the important things to consider with the market basket that we've been using, and we've used it consistently with all of our groups, is, and I understand the per capita point that you've made. I think that's a very important point, which is one of the reasons why we also included all of the adjacent communities to Westford as well too, because you're right, DESI will give us the dark districts, which can change every year. That's based on the clientele, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. So that's actually comparing students to students. So it's sort of comparing the job in a different way that I think is an appropriate way to look at the market basket as well. I think your point is, how can we bring all of those things into view to make sure that it's not skewed in some way?
Yeah, you get the point, so I'm happy.
And to extend on that point, I think, take this opportunity to say that we need to do that across the town, like not just for the school department, for any of the unions we're bargaining with.
Because, I mean, you have a certain impact that's going to have. One of the things that came out during our conversation with the Council of Aging was that they're getting more seniors to try to apply for the rebate program and the work service program, and there's some jobs they can't cover it. So some of these folks can't take advantage of those abatement programs. So that's a problem that you have to keep in mind. That's all we're asking for.
Anyone else?
So,
Go ahead, John.
yeah, I have a question. So to comment about using the offsets, I mean, I think it's great that you've been able to get the budget to where it needed to be this year. But if I look what's in the document, the proposed budget for next year, it's a significant increase over this year. All right? I mean, much larger in a sense than it was from last year to this year. So are the offsets that are left going to be able to cover the difference, or are we going to sort of run into issues where there's a large increase required for the schools, irrespective of the offsets next year? I can
So when you say that, you're comparing FY25 to FY26?
No, FY26 to FY27. I'm only looking forward. I mean, what's done in the past is done, right?
Right, but we haven't presented FY27.
Well, there's a projection there.
Yeah, but we haven't, I'm just saying, but right now we're talking about FY26, and so I think as we're looking at the realities of FY26, I think that what we tried to do previously was actually something that, in my experience, I've been in the district now for over 10 years, and I don't believe that multiple year projections have ever been something that was ever considered. So last year we were, as a group, we were looking at trying to figure out what a 3-year projection might look like.
Okay.
And so I think as we see the realities of those, then you have to make those adjustments to it, right? So what we've looked at right now is that with what we're looking at with FY26 and the offsets that we've made, kind of to answer your question, we are not looking at all of a sudden a fiscal cliff in FY27.
Okay, that's basically, you know, my concern would be that we don't frankly end up with issues that we had last year.
I don't know what FY27 is going to look like exactly.
Right.
Because that is the point. Like we also still we don't have all of our contracts to negotiate, but we have some contracts to negotiate. For us, circuit breaker and state aid is always something that is somewhat, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, and special education costs in general are always variable. So that's where I hesitate to say, I don't know, I can't say that we're not going to have a problem in FY27.
Clearly it's an estimate, right?
But what we think is that these offsets, we know that the offsets that we are proposing, or chargebacks, that we're proposing for FY26 will be able to also continue in FY27.
Okay.
I don't know if there'll be other costs to FY27. That's a concern.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe also just for frankly my ignorance, what's the circuit breaker in this context?
Okay, so what is circuit breaker in general? Okay, so circuit breaker is the funding that comes back to school districts from the state of Massachusetts that is supporting special education costs.
Okay.
And so what happens is, it is based on, I'll talk about this year specifically, right? So in FY25, in the fall of FY25, we receive circuit breaker based on the expenses of FY24. So we submit that to the state, and the state looks at all of our special education costs, and they say, we'll reimburse X amount, and it can change every single year. It's based on different things. So a community gets that the year later, and then what best practices have been is to use that to spend that amount in FY20 in the next year.
Okay.
Now, technically, we have access to it right now. So there are some communities that will use that money to pay a bill right now within FY25, but you get it in the current year based on the previous year.
Right.
But the best practice is to budget to use it for the following year.
Okay.
And so that's what we've been doing.
Okay.
So so for example, we received in this fall, we got this great news that we were going to be, because our special education costs were pretty high in FY24 based on the 14% increase and all the different things that kind of we had talked about the projections being, we received $400,000 more than we anticipated for that's for FY24.
Right.
We're receiving in FY25, and so what we've done is we're attributing that to FY26.
Okay. Okay.
Does that help?
Yep, no, absolutely. Understood.
Can I ask a follow-up question since we're talking about circuit breaker? It's wonderful news that we got this extra $400,000, but given the variableness of circuit breaker that at least some of us who've been around here for a while know, that's additional money that we can't anticipate or expect getting again.
Right.
So I just think it's something we all have to, and I know you will, just kind of bear in mind.
It is, and at the same time, one of the things that we've been doing for a number of years is that we've been building up the special education stabilization fund that we have. So we've been able to, what is that at right now? Is that at 700?
That's at $720,000. That's why we trying to build up our special education stabilization fund. Just in case if we see like a sharp increase from the special education tuition, we have some reserve.
Yeah.
Instead of just waiting, for the state reimbursement for the circuit breaker. If the circuit breaker's amount decrease, we wouldn't have the capacity to support our general fund special education tuition.
Right. No, and that certainly makes excellent fiscal planning. You have to do that because, as I said, we next year we could lose that $400,000
And honestly,
and plus.
we're already anticipating that. Right?
Okay.
So we're already thinking, because the other piece of this is that in FY25, we also know that some of our special education costs have gone down, based on just changes in
Sure.
student enrollment. And so that extra $400,000, we don't think we're gonna see in the future. We'll probably go back to the more typical circuit breaker reimbursement. So that's something that we're already thinking about and planning for.
Thank you.
You're gonna go to Nate first. Did you still have a question?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. I think it would be helpful, thank you, Dr. Chair. I also want to commend you and the school committee, and you, Valerie, as chair, for the work on the dashboards, on those revolving funds. I think it's an absolute incredible model, very transparent, easy to read, understand what's happening, and also the targets that you've set to try and bring those into a reasonable amount. That was certainly an issue that voters talked about last year and residents of the town. So the fact that you took that seriously and went at it is great. I also want to just not lose sight of the fact, though, in case anyone watching tonight or members of the finance committee or school committee didn't, spend the time watching your entire budget hearing, you had the slide in there about what the impacts were on the district due to the failed override last year. Could I ask you just to cover that? I know there's a slide that you had in your presentation.
It's in the packet tonight because the whole
yes,
presentation.
Yeah, and also what the ground operational impact of that is. Obviously, I would imagine there's a morale impact first and foremost, but just in terms of trying to do your job and for those folks on the ground, what that's been like.
So, in total, if you look at, could you go to slide 6? Sure. Thanks, Dave. So slide 6 will talk about, if you remember last year, not that many people want to think again about last year, but let's just talk about last year again. We had two different budgets, right? So we had the if an override was passed budget, and then if override was not passed budget. And even if an override was passed, wait, let me go back. Actually, if you could, because I was just saying that, could you go to the next slide first, right? And we'll go backwards, right? Thank you. So if the override had passed, we had already, in order to, because one of the things we've been very committed to is trying to be fiscally responsible, right? So every single year that I've been superintendent, we've looked specifically at our enrollment and we've said, are there efficiencies that we can identify in order to be fiscally responsible with our budget in the first place? And so we went into last year's budget season knowing that we were going to recommend reducing 8.2 staff members across the district based on enrollment. We had looked at our special education van fleet that we had, and we identified that we thought that that could be a cost savings. So there were 18 individuals who we were reducing and letting go in order to be a cost savings to us. There was an additional administrative position that we had reduced, and then in conversations with the school committee when we were trying to reduce the override ask, we identified 3 additional administrative positions. So we had a director of equity, curriculum, and instruction that we reduced, and there were 2 curriculum coordinator positions that we had reduced. So that was something that was already going into the budget, whether an override passed or not. And that in itself was, as you can imagine, was impacting the morale as you were talking about, Nate, there. And then if you go to the slide before that, you'll see that when the override failed, we actually needed to reduce an additional 21.4 instructional staff positions, right? So there were 3 elementary literacy specialists, 2 middle school reading teachers, 9.4 positions at Westford Academy, 4 middle school interventionists, 2 additional elementary classroom teachers, and then one of our, there were 2 library media specialists at Westford Academy, and we reduced one of them. And that impact was massive. And so we're feeling that this year. And one of the things that the school committee has been hearing has been sort of stories as to now what have those impacts been now that we're months in, right? Because we make those decisions in the spring, and then of course, then the school year begins, and then all of a sudden we have either whether it's increased class sizes or whether it's combining class sections and levels at the academy, and what's that impact actually like? And it's not ideal. It's not a situation that we think is best serving our population. And so that's why I led this conversation with, this isn't ideal. I don't think that this is strong funding. We are looking at additional reductions that we're making. I think that we can continue to provide, I think, solid educational experiences for our students with the reductions that we're talking about, but it's not necessarily at the same level that it has been. So I think it's something that we need to continue to assess and look at. The reductions that we're talking about for this year specifically is we're reducing some of our interventionists, and there's a lot of concern about that. Now, we know that if in the future we find that we've made more reductions than we should in terms of the support that we're providing for our students, we will figure out a way to provide those supports, right? But I think that's just something that it is important to understand. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, Dennis.
So, I think we should get this on the record. What's the school population this year compared to last? Is it increased, decreased?
It changed only it didn't change as significantly from last year to this year as it had previously. Over the last 10 years, the numbers have been decreasing, which is why we've made these adjustments in enrollment. So the difference between this year and what we're anticipating next year is approximately about 40 students, which is why you see that one of our suggestions is to reduce 2 elementary sections again.
This is more or less, 40 more, less?
We're anticipating that there might be approximately 40 less students in the district next year than to this year. And from last year, I think it's about the same. It might be a difference of like 30 students.
Is there a higher?
Right now, we're around 4,500 students.
Is that decrease a little bit higher in the elementary grades?
Yes.
Okay. And the last question I have for you is, with regards to the reserve accounts, you make reference to the fact that there's about a 4-year period where you feel comfortable, and then you talk about approaching a fiscal cliff with regard to funding, where the funding's coming from. I think I'd like to get a better understanding what funds those reserve accounts. I was under the impression that a lot of the funding was as a result of fees and things like that, which I would think would probably continue. But do you see a tail off in that? Is that what's the concern with the lack of funding?
Well, so the point being is that when one of the things that was a concern that I think we heard from the voters, that we heard from people asking questions, was that we did have access to these reserve funds, and how are they being utilized? Even though we have historically used them to offset the general fund in different ways, there weren't specific targets. Yeah. There wasn't a specific end of year balance that should be in that account in order to truly provide the support that you need. For example, what Jenny was talking about with our special education stabilization fund, to say that, as we're building that up, right, like that can be used then to support special education costs in a one-off type scenario. So we have a number of accounts that, when we worked with the school committee to identify, no one had ever said how much should be in that account.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So school choice is a perfect example, right? So school choice is something that we receive as a district. Not every district in Massachusetts receives that, but we bring in, previously it was about $450,000 a year. Now we're looking at approximately $500,000 a year. That we're going to bring into the district from school choice students, from students who live in different towns, who then are coming to Westford to be educated. Their towns send, it's about $5,000 per student, If they receive special education services, then that number might be adjusted. DESE does all of that behind the scenes. We don't set that amount, but it's about $5,000 per student. So we know that we're going to be receiving that. Historically, we weren't offsetting our general fund budget by that same amount. So it was building up. So it was building up over time. So we had this reserve account. And in the past, I had compared that to the town's free cash, right? And some people had questions about that, but I'm like, it was something that we use that when we're purchasing curriculum, right? So we spent, over 2 years, we spent $600,000 on new curriculum that we desperately needed for our elementary schools that we didn't ask the town for. That we then, it wasn't in our general, we didn't have it in our general operating budget. We were able to use school choice funds for that purpose. So that's something that we would use it for. When we created our plan a number of years ago to bring tuition-free full-day kindergarten into the district, part of that plan included using school choice funds and ARPA funds over a period of years to kind of bridge that fiscal cliff. And then what happened was our plan, we thought we would be spending more school choice money than we actually needed to because it ended up not being as expensive as we thought it would be. So we needed to use the ARPA funds, but we didn't need to use as much school choice funds. So that amount didn't decrease as much as we thought it would. So that's an example of then as a school committee, they established a finance committee subcommittee of the school committee a couple of years ago, and so right. I mean, there's so many things to figure out. Right? And so we worked on what is an appropriate balance, and so what we determined was an appropriate balance for school choice really should be 1% of what our general fund is. So if our general fund is around $69 to $70 million, we should have about $600,000 to $700,000 in school choice funds. So that's how we establish that target, because that would allow us to then purchase things like curriculum, purchase things like we used school choice funds in a roundabout way. We're able to use it to support other things as well too. There are very specific rules. One of the things that you'll see in the non-general fund guidebook, the NGFG, we attached all of the laws and the regulations that go with every single account because there's very specific things that go with them. So we have to play by those rules. But that means that maybe we can spend money in our operating fund and then support it in another way. It goes back to your point of the chargebacks, right?
And that's a good explanation. I think what I'm trying to get at is, so you're using money more efficiently, which is excellent. That's what you should be doing, right? So the question is, what's the threat to that fund? It should be replenished every year. So what would be the problem? Where does that fiscal cliff, what causes that?
So
if you're getting money coming in all the time.
Thank you. So let's go back to school choice, right?
All right.
So what we've established is that what should stay in school choice for the emergency is the 1%.
Okay.
We are currently over the 1%.
Okay.
So that's the numbers that Jenny looked at, was what's above the target and how can we increase the offset? So is it almost $900,000 of school choice that we're anticipating for FY26?
For FY26, we are anticipating more than like $500,000, but we are using $789,000 because in general, like a revolving account, we are only supposed to use the revenue we bring in, but actually we are increasing that threshold for $260,000 because we are trying to spend down the school choice account.
Right. So Jenny looked at the school choice account and said, okay, well, if our target is the $700,000, we're above that right now. So we can increase the offset above the $500,000 over, but we can only do that for so many years. Yeah. And so what we did is we looked at, and most of them are all living at the 3 to 4 years. Some of them it's a small amount. School choice is a large amount, right? And so ultimately then we'll still have $700,000 in that account, but that's gonna be there for that special purchase that we need, like the curriculum, because again, we already know that just like we did it cost us about $600,000 to purchase the universal ELA curriculum that we've never had in Westford for all of our elementary schools. We really need to do the same thing with science, and we need to do the same thing with math. So we're going to be looking at that over the next couple of years.
I would just say for the future, I think it's gonna be important for you to report what your targets are on all those accounts.
And that's part of the book, right? So in that guidebook, that's the appropriate, that's part of it, is that the school committee has established what we think that the appropriate end of year balance is. And then the idea is that if we are above that balance, then it's my job and our job as the administration to then explain to the school committee how we plan to utilize those funds so that we live within that target.
Got it. Thank you.
And so,
Let me just go to John first, and then I'll come to you, Shelby.
Oh, sure. Just on the same subject, for something like school choice, in order to have a voucher or a credit for that, I would presume that somebody would have to enroll ahead of time and go through some sort of process to do that. So, when do you actually know what that number is going to be?
So we actually have to do a lottery every single year. It's by law. So we hold that lottery in. We determine how many openings that we think we can support, and then so like for example, if you are once you are I just lost the word. It's like
Accepted.
Thank you. That's that word. Once you're accepted into school choice in a district, then that slot is yours until you graduate. So if you come in kindergarten, if you come in fourth grade, wherever it is, you have that spot in that district. So we know how many students are already in our district in those school choice slots. And then each year we determine how many new spots might exist. We start with the graduating class. And so we say how many seniors are graduating, and then I present to the school committee, this is my recommendation for the number of openings that we have based on what our class sizes are and all that different stuff. And then we have to conduct a lottery. This is all mandated by state law, and we do that. Typically, we do the lottery. We've been doing it like mid-July. So we have an idea. I present to the school committee in the spring as to what I think the openings should be, but then who actually gets those slots is determined in July.
Okay, so relative to something like a circuit breaker, this is a pretty defined number that you're pretty certain to get. And
one of the things that I've said is we're anticipating so far. We have historically, like for example, we were getting about $450,000. It's increased. We increased those numbers to $500,000. And one of those things that I say, I want us to stay around that number. So I do think that it's important. We don't, when the seniors leave, we don't automatically bring them in at the first grade level. We look at the grades throughout the district because there might have been people who've left and moved out and not moved in, and so those openings could show up anywhere.
Okay, so this offset then is effectively a one-time adjustment to that kind of account to use up that capital, and then you keep rolling at the 500,000-ish mark.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
yeah, I just was based off of the kind of offset conversation we're having. So there's still things that can happen with all of these revolving accounts that could kind of like inch them up slowly over time, but we'll be addressing those kind of like in the yearly budget process. And just for this next couple years, we have the larger offsets. There's always probably going to be like some amount of small offsets to get us back to the target numbers. But just we don't expect them to be as large as these like next couple of years where we're trying to get them back down to target.
Well, yes, I would say when you look at all of the accounts, some of them are really small accounts, and so some of them it's an offset of $1,000, right? And that I think will continue as well too, because it depends on which. Some of them might hit their target sooner. I think for the most part, the majority of them, we did balance it out to see how could we increase that offset so that it lasts for 3 to 4 years. Some of them are already at target, so we're not even touching them. But the offsets that we do have, I think that's yes. Yeah, I kind of just went around, so I'm not even sure. I think I answered you in the affirmative, but then I think I confused myself while I was talking, so I apologize.
job.
I just a comment, I want to echo what Nate and Dennis said. I know that the committee worked really hard to put your non-general fund, I have to look, your non-general fund guidebook together, and I really think that going forward, it's going to be an incredibly useful tool, not only for the school committee, but also for the finance committee and the town and the select board. It clearly addresses questions and issues that not only we all had last year, but I also think we all heard from the town and the community itself. So I think it's, hopefully the hardest part of the work is done just by having put it together, but I think it's very important that each year, you update it, you keep it up to date, you track what the funds, the excess funds are being used for and spent for, because I think that's something that, as I said, I think the town really wanted to see and really wanted to know, and was in the dark about it. And I think that that we heard that loud and clear last year. So kudos to you for taking the time, the effort, and I'm sure it was a lot of people working on it, so.
Well, and to that end, I mean, because you're all, you're appointed and you're elected, but you're all volunteers, right? And Valerie Young did a tremendous amount of work on this, in terms of researching and looking to see if there were any examples that existed anywhere, and they were they're very difficult to find. But the other members of the FinCom that met multiple times to meet with us to talk about it, I do think it was a group effort, and so.
And it's also very readable. I just thought I would let you.
Yeah.
It's very readable for.
Good. I'm glad. We thought it was too, but then it's also like I don't know.
Right. From somebody who's not on the school, okay, it's
Right.
readable and understandable, and I think that's also important.
And to your point, that we've committed to a cycle of it,
Yeah.
so that each fall, the finance subcommittee will be reviewing that, seeing what the previous year's actuals were, and checking in on those to set up the next year's budget discussions, so.
Great.
And a piece of it that was, I think, great was that we talked a great deal about how can it be something that we can sustain, right? And so one of the things we talked about is, like, honestly, Jenny shouldn't have to do her work 3 times, right? So it's like, how can this document talk to that document so that she's able to just kind of do the work once, and then we're seeing it in multiple places. And then we talked about the school committee developing policy, and should the policy actually include these numbers, or should the policy just talk about pointing to the book, and then the book itself is updated in the budget process? And so we really thought through it in such a, I think, intentional way that it should help generations of, folks, whoever sits at these tables,
Progress.
So I'm gonna say ditto on the book, because it is a huge help. And I've been looking at these numbers for quite a while, and I have my own spreadsheet going to track things the way I like to look at them. So it was a lot easier to sort of fill in my little spreadsheet, and then I can kind of look at things. And I know that during the subcommittee work, you had talked about this kind of being a pilot, and, you may sort of edit pieces of the document if as we go through this, we decide, or you decide, we should put this information or that information. So some of my comments are to that end. Like, this is me looking at it in a different way than maybe you are. Well, the first thing is, some of the FY25 ending balances in the spreadsheet that we had asked in our questions for Jenny to give to us didn't match the ending balances in the guidebook. And so I just wasn't sure, why that.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we have to bear in mind, because, the ending balance provided from the NGFG, That's actually in the projection from last year, because that was
That's kinda
prepared
what I
at
was
the same
thinking.
time.
All right.
The same time frame at January 24, because we didn't have the data for fiscal year 25's quarter one and quarter two. So at this point,
Gotcha.
we already received the actual
Yep.
spending data for
So
this
you're
fiscal
dealing with
year.
half actuals in the
So
spreadsheet.
when we
Okay.
provide the projection for fiscal year 26, we are using the actual data for this year, making a new projection for the end of fiscal year 26. So that's all about the timing difference for this whole document.
Gotcha.
So when the finance subcommittee prepared this NGFG, at that point, we didn't have fiscal year 25's data. We have to use last year's projection and enter the number here. However, for fiscal year 27, so we will use fiscal year 25's projection for fiscal year 26. Unfortunately, there's always like a year behind for this whole number for the projection. That's based just how does the timing
Sure,
work?
that makes a little more sense. I would imagine going forward though, because in the past I feel like your estimates and then your actuals generally come in pretty close. I think the one that sort of stuck out to me was the food service that was off by, like $800,000 or something. And I'm guessing something changed, obviously, between last year and this year.
Because
The estimates from last year versus
we settled the food service contract because we see the salary increase for food service department, and we also see the state reimbursement amount actually decreasing from last year. We are not sure the total participation for the student. They are reducing because for fiscal year 23, we see like $3.5 million for the total reimbursement for the food service. That's because that was the first year of universal free lunch. We had a lot of participation from the student, but from the first quarter of fiscal year 25 and second quarter, we don't see the reimbursement amount the same pattern as fiscal year 24. So that's why we have to adjust our projection. That's like two different factors. One is just negotiation result. The other one is just participation number.
Okay.
And during the COVID year, we received the funding from the federal reimbursement and state reimbursement. However, in current 2 fiscal year, we don't have the reimbursement from the federal. We only have the state. So that's another reason you see the projection reduce.
Okay. On the topic of food service again, it sounds like the kitchen equipment update and maintenance is sort of being worked on, and we got some answers there to that question. Do you have any idea when we'll have dollar amounts and a timeline, something a little more specific as to what they're going to need to be doing over the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, we're working with the
Okay.
director of food services. Some of it's a little bit like as it is sort of happening. It depends on what those costs might be, depending on when things break down, or as they're trying to be proactive in looking at things as well too. So we can look at it that she's been looking at it to try to have her own sort of capital needs in play, but it hasn't filtered into our official capital requests.
Okay, and do you think it will at some point?
Yeah.
And will that come to the capital committee?
Yeah, it should. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, when it for the things that hit that threshold,
Yep.
right? Similar, because like if you look on the list, like she's talked about a couple of walk-in freezers, right? So we did just see a walk-in freezer on capital for Miller, right? So I think it was Miller. Was it Miller? 2 years?
2 years
A few years ago.
Yeah, so
That was-
and now we're gonna see some of those bigger ticket items that will kind of look, but we just haven't seen that yet.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And then kind of what I'm getting at is, so right now, the ending FY 25 balance for food service is probably going to be in the $1.6 million range, and I didn't write it here, but I think the 3 months worth of operating expenses
It's 250,000
Thank
per
you.
month to 300,000 per month.
Okay,
So it's about
750 to
750 to
$900. Okay.
$900,000.
so minimally there's $700-ish thousand above that threshold that you can, we
Yeah.
need to do. And so this sort of goes to the offsets, which are at 153, 150 something or another now.
156 or
156,
158.
okay.
Yeah.
And I know that covers, you know, kind of the head custodian, and Jenny gave us a kind of a breakdown of some of the things that you're tracking to have that cover. But there's definitely other things that I believe support food services that are still being funded through either your operating budget or the town's, like
There's
I'm
not
considering
much.
benefits.
Benefits is something that we talked about last year that
Yeah.
I think we could explore and look at, because I
Yeah.
think that would be the piece. Because one of the things is that the food service is one of those that is so strict
Yeah.
as to how that is expended.
Yeah.
And it has to be to support the food service program, the school lunch program, and that's
Sure.
it. So the other thing that and I think we had talked about this, Dennis, when we met last week too, talking about the difference between direct and indirect costs, right? And the notion that we right now, in order to maximize these chargebacks and these offsets, we need to be utilizing direct costs. So I think the benefits is something that I think we should explore. That's something I think we should kind of talk about, because we don't see the
Exactly,
benefits side,
exactly, but
right? So I think that that's something that would be an interesting
Yeah.
thing to
Yeah,
look at,
that'd be nice.
because
Very good.
it could support the benefits
Right,
for
and
any
it-
of the food service staff that
Sure.
are receiving benefits.
Can we, I should have asked for this, but Dan, can you get us what if we were to do that direct, indirect, like we do for the enterprise funds, could we get the number for the benefits for the food service?
Sure, I'd rather work with them on it.
Yeah,
rather
yeah,
than-
Yeah.
yeah, but yes,
Sure,
we
I
can use the
figured you'd
same
need to-
template,
yeah.
yep.
But that would it would be interesting
Right.
to see. And then I also assume that, any of these capital requests coming in for freezers, whatever, would also be coming out of this food
It would,
service
and
account.
that's our intention, and that's one of the things that our director of food service is well aware of and knows that. Okay, wait a second. These are the things that are happening. So on one level, that's why I don't think she's panicked about any concerns within our kitchens, right? Knowing that, okay, wait a second, this account has grown because of the reimbursements from the universal lunches, right?
Right.
And so then it's a question of, okay, well, how can we best utilize that? And sometimes the money's coming in, and then there's so many restrictions as to how you can spend it. You can't spend it
Sure.
quickly.
But I think these two things that we're talking about
Yep.
are like, no brainer, right? Like
Right.
we can do that. And so I'd like to see what the benefits number is, and then, as she builds out her capital plan, to sort of balance that, because the benefits could be significant, and the town has been, paying for that cost forever. And with this growing balance here, maybe we need to balance things out
Yeah.
a little bit. And I would just like to see that whole picture, right? You've got the capital request for the kitchen equipment and the benefits, and sort of put together a plan. Okay, great. The only other account that I was looking at was the school building usage, and that seems to be, growing a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, okay, so
That was something, and again, we just created that, right? So that was something that only started a number
Gotcha.
of years ago.
Okay,
And so
I thought it was- yeah.
the initial goal was, can we generate enough funds to pay for the person who is helping us to negotiate,
Yeah.
to administrate all that.
Right.
And we've been able to increase that, which I think is great. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at, and we've already looked at how we can increase that offset, and trying to figure out are we at a point where we can really project what we think the income might be?
Yeah, as you,
We do see about like 10,000 growth every single year through the past like 3, 4
Yeah.
years, especially we have never fully funded our facility preventive care.
Right,
So we are
right.
hoping we can
Right.
grow this account a little bit so we can use that to offset the general funds facility.
Great.
Sure, yeah. And again, I'm, like with a lot of these, I'm sort of looking at, and I know this wasn't, I'm looking at, you know, if you're providing some kind of a service and the fee or whatever it is going into one of these revolving accounts, are you collecting enough to cover that? Especially in like a building usage or, you know, there's some of these that fit that better than others, but, like just to keep that in mind, like if you have to bring in a custodian specific, well,
Well, that-
you know, I hope you're covering that.
We are,
and,
that's
you know
actually,
what I mean?
that's
Like,
a
things
big,
like that,
that's a
yeah.
big part of that. So as you see that, those are the expenses that you're seeing in that line.
Right, right.
So the fact is that if somebody's coming in and using the school and custodial costs are incurred, then we're billing them for that.
Yeah, okay,
As opposed to it coming out of our fund,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then just a couple other quick little comments on, you know, some of the document pieces. You know, I don't think offset is explained anywhere in that document.
Well, and then Dennis is talking about chargebacks, and
Yeah.
like, it is one of those things where it's like, it makes sense to us.
Exactly,
and
exactly.
We've
And-
tried to explain all the acronyms and tried to explain
And it-
everything else.
and it
That might
didn't-
be a good, I can see Valerie's already taking
And
notes.
honestly, I've been looking at this.
Fine offset.
Yeah, I had been
Yeah.
looking at this document for months, and it only hit me when, you know, the offsets aren't the full expenses. And then I went, oh, and I was like, oh my God, wait a minute, it doesn't even say, like, there was nowhere, because it's so ingrained to talk about offsets that it took me a while too.
And when you said we referred to it as a pilot, is because we knew that, like, we haven't taken like this will be tied to like a written policy, as Dr. Shu mentioned, and we haven't, as a committee, taken a vote on either of those documents because we said, let's go through the budget process.
See how it
so that
works.
take
Awesome.
Sort of in these reflections.
Let's make sure it does what we want it to do.
Yeah, no, smart,
And
that's smart.
finance subcommittee will meet, we've taken a brief hiatus because of our busy fall, and we'll meet again and to kind of review some of this feedback and how it worked.
Great, sure. And then just two other things, again, with the, just back to what the total expenses would be. I know you were focused on offsets in this book, but, there are other expenses coming out of some of those accounts that just come directly out. And so I think, you know, that somehow that needs to be incorporated or included when you're looking at ending balances, right? And I'm sure it is behind the scenes, but depending on how you're putting it in the book, it was a little confusing to me at first until I realized, oh, right, these expenses come directly out. They're not offsets. You know, but you're looking at the balance going, wait a minute, they're only taking $1,000. How is this balance going?
Like early arrival would be a good example of
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Like there is an
exactly.
offset to the operating fund, but there's also wages being pulled. directly
Right,
out of
right.
it.
Unless you know that, you're going, okay, how are they doing this math? Like, this doesn't make any sense. So either an explanation or including it, or, you know, just something. And then a lot of us, well, I definitely look for, you know, the proposed revenue, like revenue and expenses. And I think for like the FY26 year, the book only gives the offset. Like, I think it doesn't give the revenue. Is that?
But we do prepare another document to the finance committee for the whole projection
Right.
for the estimated revenue and expenditure as well.
That's the spreadsheet you're talking about?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a long spreadsheet. You
Yep.
can see like last 4 or 5 years.
Yep, exactly.
total historical data and also projection for the second half of fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26
Right,
total
and
projection.
I
We'll always provide 2
that's the
documents.
spreadsheet that I look forward to.
But I would anticipate the entire finance committee is gonna be looking for that, too,
Yeah.
so.
But I feel like in the last few years, like, we always have to ask for it. It's not automatic as part of the whole budget. And now that you've got this book, it's just something to think about. Could you add it? Could you add those pieces
As an appendix.
as an
because
appendix
something
or
else-
something? Do you know what I mean?
Something else we
if someone wants to dive in deeper, can they easily?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the
because
point-
again, it's always public, because we present it to you.
Right,
present
no,
to the
we
school
get it, all
committee.
the-
Yeah, you're right,
but-
yeah.
To the point, like Andrea made, was we wrestled with like how much information is too much information. We
Right.
wanted, based on all the community conversations last year, we wanted somebody to be able to click on a link and kind of get their level of information
Yep.
that they are looking for
Yeah.
at that point.
And an appendix might make sense, because Andrea's looking at it going, this is great, this is all I need to see. But I'm like,
want a little
okay,
more.
this is great, but I wanna see the math, you know, so, yeah.
That's also related.
We will
to
meet
the
both of
timing.
your needs.
Right, and we have to decide what's the best timing to prepare that document, because we have
That's
to-
true, that makes it,
Then
that
the
makes.
second quarter, all those accounts reconcile. Without those data, we cannot make an accurate projection for.
That's true too, cause then you're gonna
So,
see this difference, so.
When we have
okay.
the budget ready, the second quarter reconciliation is not ready yet. So
Yeah.
they cannot be prepared at the same time, so there's always a gap.
Gotcha.
You know, just a comment on
Yeah,
that.
sure.
You know, one of the things would be advisable is when you're putting what the offset is, you should just indicate what the source of it is. For example, state reimbursement, fees, that type of, so we can follow and see when it doesn't come in short, we understand what you're talking about, you know what I mean? That would be important, so.
Right.
Is the revenue
So-
I feel like the revenue source is listed somewhere in the
that's-
top
It
of
is.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is, Dennis.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I think it is, for each of them.
Yeah, it's one of the column, the rows on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
I'm good.
yeah, for me, I think, I kinda echo the same sentiment a bit, and, I come from, sort of private industry in finance, so this is kind of a commingling of both like a P&L and a balance sheet together, so there's accounts that are kind of moving in different sorts of ways, but there's not a cash flow statement that ties it all together, so there's just a bunch of stuff kind of moving around, and sometimes it just kind of looks like numbers on a page to me, but, what I might have asked for if I were sitting on a board of a private company is something that's called like a bridge worksheet or like a bridge chart that just kind of shows like for something like this, you might start with the opening balance, and then you have revenues kind of adding on to it, and then you have like the expenses coming out, and then you have offsets that are non-cash that kind of apply, and then you have these other things that kind of go around, and then you end with the kind of projected ending balances, so we can see what's kind of going in, what's coming out, what's cash, what's non-cash, and how that affects sort of the balance. So it kind of adds that dimension that I'm sort of missing, where I can see things moving, but I don't know exactly where they're coming from or where they're going to. So it kind of ties it that way.
Did you see the spreadsheet? Let me point him to the spreadsheet, because
Okay.
that sounds like maybe that
Because
would be a
right
big.
now, we already have two versions of spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
One from last year number, another one for this year's projection.
Yeah.
If we are trying to make another one, there will be three versions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I-
Well,
confused.
right. This wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily need to be a different version. This would just be linking up what's already in the same thing. I presume it ties. So like it would just be a presentation of what's actually already in there, but in a way that you can kind of see like what's coming in and what's going out. And I can give you an example of what I sort of used to looking at, if that's helpful. But it wouldn't be any more work other than linking up some of the cells together to show like a summary of what's coming in, what's going out, and like beginning, ending, and then what happens in the middle sort of piece of it. If that makes any sense.
You're looking for a report.
Well, it would be handy to see, for each of these kind of sections, like to Christina's comment, where things are coming from and where they're going to, and what's cash, what's non-cash, and then how you end with a balance. And then even for things like, well, if you don't know what the ending balance is for 25 yet, but you have an estimate for it, then you can have a plug or something that sits in there too that says like,
Yeah.
differences in actual versus
We can sit
projected.
down and.
Can I make a
show you the other
suggestion?
thing.
Is maybe you guys get together with Valerie and their subcommittee and talk this through and make, and your suggestions. I think it probably would be more productive,
Sure.
All right, any other questions for the school committee?
Can I ask process-wise, if you still think the 30th is?
Oh. I don't know, are we gonna have any other follow-ups? I mean, I had a couple of questions, but I don't know that it's gonna
don't have any.
need a follow-up.
I'm all set.
Anybody?
I'm all set.
I think so.
Say to me.
Thank you.
All right.
That's the
You're
reward
off the
for
hook
the,
next week.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thanks.
I think you can.
I move to adjourn.
Yeah.
Second?
We have to vote.
So you second?
Yeah.
All in favor, Tom?
Aye.
Andrea?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
I'm an aye. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, good night.
Oh, do you want to,
So good,
did you want to do, you good?
good positive meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll give them a second
was
to
creative.
walk out of the
That was
room and then
very
we can continue.
Yeah, we're a noisy bunch. Yeah.
You are a noisy bunch, you know.
Very social.
Okay. I don't think we have any old business to discuss. So let's go on to the reserve fund transfer request. Dan, can you give us background on that, or is somebody on?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
So, last week we had veterans in, and we're reviewing the budgets, and, sorry,
We're still meeting up here.
sorry. So, looking at the way we're spending at veteran services, we're already over the allotted amount for this year's budget. And so I worked with Jesse Byer to go through and kind of project out the next couple of months to get us to town meeting. And it looks like we need about $7,000 so we can continue paying those benefits. And then at town meeting, we're looking for a supplemental appropriation of $9,000 to get us through the end of the year. So it's been fairly consistent. We think that'll be enough. And just a reminder that on these benefits, we do get reimbursed 75% from the state in the following year. So, most of that money does come back, but we are helping those veterans in the
So we
meantime.
need to front it kind of?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, what does the money actually go for? What is it spent on?
So one of our largest claims right now is about $2,000 a month. A veteran is out of work, and so they're receiving the full benefit because they were injured. So that is a major claim right now that was not anticipated last year that we're having to fund this year. So, yeah, we have reduced that account over the years as claims have steadily gone down. It was at about $140,000 in the past, probably 4 or 5 years ago, and then the claims have just decreased over time. So we're at a very low level right now. I think it's about $18,000 that we have. I think $14,000 actually that we have already exceeded. So it's just claims based.
Anyone else have any questions on the reserve fund transfer?
Reserve fund transfer.
Just one, we haven't approved any,
The full
Yeah.
100,000 is still sitting there.
so the 100,000, okay. Anyone else have questions or get a motion to
Move to approve.
Approve.
The transfer.
somebody second?
Second.
Second, okay, all in favor, I'm gonna do a roll call since we're online. Nate,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Aye.
Dennis,
Aye.
Shelby,
Aye.
I'm an aye. Hari?
Aye.
And Beth?
Aye.
Okay, so that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the minutes, the January 16th minutes, is anyone,
I'll
has
move to
anyone gotten
approve.
approved? Okay.
For a second.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Just a comment. On the place, it just says virtual meeting, it should be hybrid on the, when it,
Oh, on the 16th?
Thank you. So as
Okay.
amended, yep.
All right,
I'll fix
so-
that.
All right, so we've got a motion to approve as amended
yeah.
in a second.
Second.
Nate,
Aye.
Jonathan,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Dennis,
Aye.
Shelby,
Aye.
I'm an aye. Hari
Aye.
and Beth?
Aye.
Okay, so those are approved. I don't know that we need any board and committee updates right now. It sounds like you guys went through them last week, or anybody have anything? You have something, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, Nate, go ahead.
I think it's important to just update the finance committee on our most recent health insurance trust meeting.
Sure.
Happened on,
That looks
I
good.
don't remember what day that was.
That was
Tuesday?
Tuesday. It
Yeah.
was Tuesday. Yes.
It's 7
Been a
days
long
ago.
week. Yes.
So, just for the edification of the committee, our broker brought forward renewals for the stopgap insurance, which is what covers the high-cost claims currently above $125,000. Okay. And the premium, just as a straight renewal, would have been an increase of around 50%.
A little less, but yeah, 50 is the max, is around 48%, I think.
8%.
Yeah.
So, as you can imagine, that's problematic. And the broker also put this out to bid. Sort of, he told the health insurance trust that he put it out to market, and there was only one additional company willing to bid on it, but they put on what's called lasering provisions, which are problematic in the sense that they cap off high individual claimants and basically say those people are your problem after a certain point, because we can see in your claims data that they're, and so the net cost of that, if those claimants continue, is substantially more to the town and to the trust. So what that leaves is that there was several options there from Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is the current provider of the stopgap insurance. The best case scenario on that increase is one that would bring it down by increasing the amount the trust would pay for before that stopgap kicks in to around $200,000 of claims, so that it would only cover claims above that, would reduce the increase, the net increase to the town is estimated by the consultant, by the broker, to be at 28%. As you can imagine, that's still a substantial increase. The good news is, as I said last week, our claims have been trending in a positive direction, and that stopgap insurance accounts for, Dan, can you remind me the percentage of the total?
So it's currently this year it's about 2.4 million out of the 18 million in total spending. So it's a small percentage of the budget. So although the percentage increases sound scary, they're still substantial increases, but they're not the entire health insurance budget.
Right. Yeah. It is
Still,
it is still a good chunk.
almost $1 million, or
Yeah, I think
less.
I think it was
Less than
7.
that.
Yeah, so Mark Criscitelli, our broker, he provided with the most cost-effective option that he put on the table was for the stop loss to increase to 200%, and he was showing an overall 28% increase, and part of that is estimating the number of 200,000 plus claims, and I think the number was at 11?
Yes.
And we're currently at 6, so it's a very conservative estimate with that 28%.
Yep.
So.
But we've been in the 20s previously, right?
And we're trending the other way, which is great. So we all.
I would just add my own commentary on this, based on my experiences, that this has been part of my concern as a member of the Health Insurance Trust, and even prior to my joining the Health Insurance Trust, is that self-insured pools that are small are potentially exposed to volatility.
Yep.
And we're experiencing that at the high cost claim levels. There's also some good news in that there's been some movement to incentivize employees using higher cost services that have high claim values to find lower cost alternatives. We explored some options on that as well this week. So there's attempts to influence behavior that can hopefully drive that down. But what you can't necessarily predict with a very small pool is that next year 3 people won't get terminal illnesses that require really serious surgeries, interventions, et cetera, or an injury, that could dramatically cause $1 million in claims, et cetera. And that volatility is what is one of our biggest challenges, and that we've kind of been at a high watermark on that for a couple of years. And so, I will continue to raise at the Health Insurance Trust the notion of exploring alternatives with much larger pools, including but not limited to the Group Insurance Commission for municipalities, which has a pool of 600,000 people. And so, this would not be a conversation that would occur if we were in the Group Insurance Commission, for example. The only thing that would occur is the annual increase that spread across all of the members and the cost for that.
Are there still plan design changes being considered for next year? Is that in the works?
Yeah, we haven't gone back to that. I'd say it's on the table for the trust.
Yeah, we have a little bit of
We're
time
always
to
exploring
talk to
everything,
that, but
yes.
talk about that.
So stopgap means that a certain level of claims, they will not pay beyond. Is that what I'm saying?
No, it's actually, it's a version of reinsurance, which is basically you taking out insurance against your most high-cost claimants. And the insurance company is taking a gamble and coming up with an actuarial analysis to figure out how they can potentially make money off of it based on your experience with the higher-cost claimants. So in our case right now, our stopgap insurance kicks in for any claims above $125,000.
For any individual
Claimant.
person.
Yeah. And so, you know, one of the strategies we're looking at, and by the way, the problem with our timing on this is the renewal for this is in March. The renewal for our policy, our health insurance policy, is in October?
November.
November. It's completely misaligned.
So when you actually.
Neither of which is on a fiscal year.
When you cross that stopgap, what's the financial impact? Do we have to, if somebody goes above that, do we have to kick in with a higher premium?
No, so Dennis, so we get to stop paying after 125,000 and our insurance kicks in. But the next year, they're gonna come back at you, right? And they're gonna want their money back.
This is the premium, and I think you can look at this renewal and the lack of bidding on it as it being upside down.
And it's gone down every single year. We seem to get less people bidding. I think we've switched insurance companies almost every year for the stop loss.
We started, we had one company the first year, and then Sun Life the first year, then we've been with Blue Cross since.
So it was Blue Cross for 2 years?
2 years, yep.
Okay.
So I just think it's important to, you know, that happened in a public meeting this week, but those aren't as well attended, and as your designee on that commission, just wanted to bring you up to speed on that.
Thanks. Anyone else have anything to drop?
The only thing on Robinson School Committee, they presented to the Capital Committee. I don't know if anybody from the Capital Committee wants to comment on that piece of it or not.
Well, so
It's a lot of money.
the Capital Committee did vote to recommend going forward with the feasibility study at 1.6 million. Yeah, so we'll wait until we'll have there'll be an article at town meeting and in sometime in February. Yeah. So sometime in February, that'll come before us to make a recommendation as well.
And that was in line with what other towns have been doing for
Yeah,
feasibility
it
studies.
seemed to be in line. We're gonna get 4 different or possibly 5 different options out of that feasibility study, you know, repairs, renovations, new building. I'm kind of waiting to hear a little more about it, because it was fairly quick at the Capitol meeting. But there'll be time for longer presentations and get a little more details. Anyone else? I think we're good. We're back next week on the 30th. We don't have the schools coming back. Unless something comes up, let me know, but I don't think we need to have them back. And then we've got general government, revenue, capital, debt, I forget what else.
Risk management.
There's a big list. Okay. Nothing else? 'Cause I'll take a.
Can I just ask, is our meeting next week here in this location?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion adjourned?
Second.
Second? All right. Bye-bye. I'm not.